So you're in this thing, and obviously, I mean, just listening to you talk about it, I mean, obviously your personality type is such that, you accomplish a goal and immediately your mind goes to what's next. I mean, that's got to be just something that's within you, right? That's just the way that you are wired as a person, right?
I think so. It's a curiosity. It's curiosity to see, for two things. One, is this thing possible? I didn't know if it was possible. It's not very well documented. Efforts like that are not very well documented. And then secondly, can I do it? Right? Is this possible? I don't know. Maybe it is. If it is, am I the one to do it? And so like those are the things that I'm really curious about. And I think it is something that's hardwired. I think it's to some degree it's hardwired. I think that if someone has wants to set an outsized goal and complete something like this, they're capable of doing something like that. I tell everyone that I represent nothing special. I'm not. People joke around and say, "Oh my God, like superhuman." Like I can't. That the truth is that's not true at all. I'm just someone who was very lucky, right, to have that intersection of my life in terms of life experience, right, the things that my brother taught me in terms of where I was in my work life, right, where I had the freedom to go and travel on the weekends to do these things, where I had the physical training to do. So all of those things intersected in a way that allowed for success in this project. I think that other people can do this thing. It's something that you can plan for. It's something that you can train towards. You can create that goal and you can set out to accomplish it. And you don't need to be something special to do it.
There's another wrinkle to the story, Michael, on you, and you know where I'm going next, because you're doing these 100-mile races every weekend. You're traveling, you're seeing different places, and then COVID. You are in the middle of this. I mean, so kind of walk us through it. Had you already set the goal to do this 100 times when the pandemic hit? Because you talk about having a goal and having to pivot. I mean, what you did, and
right.
You can explain it. What you did. And folks, if you think that what you've heard so far is unbelievable, you ain't heard nothing yet, because what Michael tells you about how he continued in the midst of the pandemic is really going to blow your mind. So I'll let you pick it up from there.
Sure. So it was well, to answer your question, I'd gotten to the end of 2019, and that was I had it in my mind, and so the last race of 2019 was on the last day of the year, and that was a timed race, and I at that time I hadn't yet announced the 100 goal. I was on number, I believe that was 50. That was 58. That was 58. I think the expectation to people following this project was that once I got to the end of 2019, that would be it, right? Like it's because when you hit the end of a calendar year, that sort of represents the end of something, right? And that wasn't the case. So in the back of my mind, I thought I wanted to be this special thing, like this, like reveal at the stroke of midnight kind of thing. But once 2020 came, like after midnight, I would announce that I was going for 100 100s. And that meant, that was a very scary thing for me. And I thought, okay, well, and I had this schedule, like loose, I penciled, right? And I say penciled because I didn't, I had done the research to figure logistically, can I do this? But I hadn't set anything in stone. I hadn't registered for the races. I hadn't gotten the flight ticket, like all those things. So that's what I call penciled. And when the clock struck midnight, I was on for that race. I believe I was at mile 75, and then I was posted. I had written it beforehand. I planned all this. I knew what I was doing, and I figured, okay, mile 70, stroke of midnight. Just go ahead, wish everyone a happy new year. Oh, and by the way, this is what we're doing for 2020. And I did something that I hadn't done before. And I posted the schedule, like it was a tentative schedule, but I posted it. I said, we're going for 100. This is it. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I will never have this again, where things align in such a way that you have the flexibility to do this. I may as well go for it now. What that meant was I was committing myself to 42 more weeks of this grueling effort, 42. And I knew that, like I knew it was and not only was I committing myself to it by saying it, I was also showing the schedule. I want to do this for another 42 weeks. Oh, by the way, this is what it's going to look like. That's it, right? It's kind of like, and of course it's a tentative schedule, so you can mix and match. You can swap races where maybe, okay, I thought that would work, but that didn't. I need to swap this one out for this one, right? But like for the most part, it's there. I was scared. I was excited. This is the start of 2020. There's uncertainty here, right? In all unknown territory for myself, certainly, because I had done 58 weeks of this. I didn't know. I mean, I was fairly confident of my execution for the next 42, and that execution was going to be a very careful one, meaning I couldn't be daring. I couldn't start out races, with like, oh, I'm going to PR for this. Like, no, not at all. This needs to be, I need to regulate my effort. I need to be more intelligent about what the cutoffs are. I need to be a little more humble, meaning that if I feel I can run a faster pace, like a 9-minute pace for 20 miles, I need to hold it back and actually run maybe an 11-minute pace. And so all of that, I knew that I had to regulate my effort. So 42 weeks, I put it out there. I complete the race. That race was number 58. And then, I fly home and I'm like, oh, this is out there. All right, it's okay. You've been doing this for 58 weeks. Now all you need to do is execute. Like, you have the game plan. Here's the game plan. You've done the work. Now do. And I started doing it. And so, 58, 59. And so for that January of 2020, January and February, I, still flying out to races, still putting fairly difficult races on the calendar. Also, there's one race in February of 2020 called the Orcas Island 100. It has 20,000 feet of elevation because you're on Mount Constitution and you're climbing up and down Mount Constitution several times during the course of this race. And I completed. It's a very regulated effort. It was very, plan. Okay. Yeah. I knew the time constraints. I knew the time cutoffs. I crossed the finish line for that race with minutes to spare. And that was a 36-hour race. So that does very well for my confidence. That was number 63 in the series. That does very well for my confidence because it lets me know that I could still, if I had to, I could still do difficult things. It just takes planning and it takes restraint. And you need to be careful. So that was 63. When March rolled around, and you know where I'm heading with this, we started to read more in the news about the situation that's happening in China, in Wuhan, China. And we actually started to hear about that earlier in the year. And this is something that was a remote, you read about it, but you don't really, you can't appreciate it, right? Because you're not there. It doesn't impact you. And,
right.
At the time I was thinking, how is this different from, a SARS epidemic, it's something that did happen, but was not as serious as what the coronavirus eventually became. Right. So at the time I thought, well, that happens from time to time, right? These epidemics, but they don't really approach a pandemic level because we never had that before. So back in my mind, that's what it was. And what I had done was in those 42 weeks, I had being the person that I am. We talked about this hardwired trait. I wanted to I like sort of double down on my goal. I wanted to hit 100s. But I also wanted to hit all 50 states and at least 5 countries. And so I planned the schedule in that way. And sort of, if it was going to be this big epic effort, why don't we go for it kind of thing. And so I had 5 countries on my calendar. Italy was one of those countries. And so Italy Tuscany Crossing 100 is a 100-mile race in Italy that's in March. And so that was all, frustratingly, that was all paid for, and all of this, the travel and all. And then we're getting reports in March, right? It was end of February, beginning of March, about this situation, coronavirus, that spread outside of China and now is in certain parts of Europe. And Italy was one of those parts of Europe that it had hit. So I was looking at and I'm 2 weeks out from the race, and I'm looking at the calendar, and I'm like, do I take a chance? Like, I don't know. Like, and I spoke to some of my friends, and they said, well, you can go there, right? Are they restricting you? And I'm like, no, there's no restrictions. It's more like, be careful, come at your own risk kind of thing. And they said, well, think about it this way. If you travel there and you get stuck, you might not be able to return home. And I thought, oh my goodness, you're right. Like, Italy might let me in to run the race, but the United States might not let me back. So you know what? I'm not taking that chance. I'm scratching this from the calendar. And so from that time, I took off all the international races, and I was a little bummed out about it, but that was the right thing to do because, I wanted to minimize my risk. The race was canceled anyway. So that Tuscany crossing, beautiful race, but the situation in Italy was getting a little more serious. So out of social health standpoint, they just had to cancel it, and they did. Mid-March rolls around, and I'm running a race, and this is number 68. I'm running a race in Florida, and that one was a road race, and I completed it. And after completing it, there was that's when the lockdowns started in the U.S. And there were several cities that had locked down. California, Los Angeles, San Francisco. They were among the first to lock down. And I remember reading the news reports and like, oh my goodness, like this is actually happening. And I had no idea that this was happening because I was running a race. I finished the race and I started to look at the news. I'm like, what is going on? Wait, we're locking down. And then there was talk, right? The rumors that New York City was the next to get locked down. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to fly home. Like this is if New York City locks down and I can't fly back home or I have to quarantine for 2 weeks, I might not be able to, what's going on? So I flew to New York right away. And then in New York City locked down. And so it was a lockdown, but people could still fly. So I try to figure out ways where I could, still run the races on my calendar. Now, at this point, the races weren't canceled. And so I figured, okay, the challenge here is to go and actually complete these races. They weren't canceled yet. So then the race on the number 69 was something called Flat Top Mesa in Arizona. And I had flown out to that race, but I didn't know if I should be going to that race. This was now we're approaching the end of March. The tensions are high about people traveling to begin with, and they're saying only travel if you're an essential worker or if you absolutely need to. Don't travel just for the heck of it. And I figured, well, I need to be careful. I need to wear a mask. I need to do hand sanitizer, all this stuff. And I flew out to that race in Arizona. It was a Friday night. Actually, I flew out to Salt Lake City, and I had a 4-hour drive from Salt Lake City to Flat Top Mesa. That was the cheapest execution. And so I'm traveling, driving to the race, and I'm on the phone with my girlfriend saying, I'm driving to this race. I'm not really sure. There seems to be pushback from people traveling to begin with. I'm not really sure what I should do. Should I continue going forward? I don't know. And she mentioned, well, let's think about it. What's the risk? The risk is you go to this race, right? And you're an asymptomatic carrier of the coronavirus. And now at this time, we didn't have all the information that we do today. And, you're an asymptomatic carrier and you interact with some volunteers at the aid stations. You maybe interact with locals at the hotel, and you transmit this asymptomatically, not knowing it. And this is a small town to begin with, because this is a very remote race, very remote location. They in turn take that and spread it to each other. And their hospital system just doesn't have, or they don't have the infrastructure or the ventilators to handle a pandemic. That's the risk. And I thought, you are right. That is the risk. And honestly, that's something that I can't accept. Right. So I'm on the way to the race. I'm an hour away. So I've already been driving 3 hours and having this conversation, just talking through it. And it didn't, I want to find what the socially responsible thing to do was. And the socially responsible thing to do was to not run the race, even though I was there. So I turned around, and it was like 11 o'clock at night. And, the race was set to begin at 6 a.m. the following day. I pulled over, I emailed the race director and said, hey, this is the situation. I decided not to do it. It's not the right thing to do. I'm going to drive back. And so, he said, totally understandable. I understand. You have a race credit. Whenever you want to use it, you can use it. I'm taking your name off the list. So, okay, great. And I drove back 3 hours to Salt Lake City, flew back to New York. I'm bummed out because now this is Saturday and I'm thinking, what do I do? I don't know what to do. Like this is, I didn't run this race. I'm going to lose out on this weekend. I don't like, is this it? Is the Game of Hundos over at number 68? And for the better part of a day, I almost capitulated. And I almost said, okay, this is it. I can't control a global pandemic. This is one of those exogenous factors where it's stopping me dead in my tracks, quite literally. And around that same time, the races were getting canceled anyway. I'm looking at my email on this Saturday. Everything was happening all at once. No one knew. There was still such great uncertainty. Looking at my phone and at the emails, and about on that Saturday, a quarter of the races had either been canceled, postponed, or just rescheduled for some unknown date. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And I'm comparing this against my Game of Hundos calendar, and I'm like, okay, well, this one's canceled, that one's canceled. Is there another race on the calendar we could fill that in with? And it turns out, and I'm trying to like actively manage this as it's happening. And it was a fruitless effort, because if I did find another race to fill in that slot for the next weekend, it was just canceled. And so I thought, I think we have to stop it here. And so this was all of Saturday for that weekend, that entire Saturday, just sitting down, just trying to rework the problem, and then realizing that's not a problem that can be reworked with certainty, because you can rework the problem and then it changes. Literally everything changes the next day. So I figured, this is it. I can't, if they're not official races, how could I possibly go forward with the plan? I woke up the next day, Sunday, have to think about it, right? And I figured, no, we can't stop here. We can't possibly stop here. We've gone for 68 weeks. There's no way that we're stopping this effort after 6,800 miles, that we're just stopping. Like, this is not the way to end the Game of Hundos. We have to figure out a way forward. And so I started I looked around my living room, as crazy as this sounds, looked around my living room and thought, I just want to measure this out to see how large the perimeter of my living room is. And I measured it out, and it was 45 feet and a rectangular shape. And I thought, how many rotations would I need to do to complete 100 miles? So there's 5,280 feet in a mile, right? And I thought, okay, well, do the math. So it was a 45 foot perimeter, right? You're not exactly following that 45 feet to a T. So you have to account for when you're cornering, you have to account that you're losing. It was a foot and a quarter of loss when you turn the corner. So it was more like a 40-foot track. And that would take 17,000 rotations to complete. And so I thought, my God, all right, it's very, so when you're running in such a short loop, you're not running. You're at best, you're shuffling quickly. You cannot gain like the momentum that you do when you're actually outside. There's none of this going on. It's kind of like you're constant turns. And I'm like, is this something that I want to do? I don't know. And I had to make a decision soon, because if I didn't continue, I would lose that streak. So I did the math, I worked it out, and then I just said, you know what, we're doing this. I posted about it. I committed to it, and I said the Game of Hundos is not going to end. When the rule, and I said this as a means of motivation, but now it's kind of like become something that I think about when I talk about how the Game of Hundos continues. But I say when the game changes, the rules of the game change. You have to change your execution to that game. You have to change your own rules for the game. And so my changing the execution was going from official races to these unofficial solo efforts. And, I put it down, line in the sand. This is it. This is what we're doing. And we're continuing for as long as we need to until official races start back up again. And so that first 100 indoors, it was I termed it the indoor 100, was very difficult. I had it live streamed for the entire time that it took, and it took 60 hours to complete. So I had it on Facebook Live. I had a stream going on YouTube. I wanted it to be the effort to be recorded so that there was no disagreement on what was going on. I submitted my measurements. Everything was recorded. Everything was tracked. All the miles were tracked. All the footsteps were tracked, because I wanted this to be, as close to official as possible. And I completed that first mile. It took 25 minutes to complete the first mile, and that was 1,700 rotations. And I thought, oh my goodness. And this is live stream, so people are looking at this and they're like, they're saying, continue, go, you can do this. And I'm thinking personally to myself, I'm thinking, that was mind bending. The first one, after 10 miles, it was just like, I can't, oh my goodness, this is going to be a very long days.
Yeah.
And it was very long. And so one step at a time, that's how I took it. And every mile I would change direction. So, 1,700 turns going in one direction clockwise. I would, when I hit mile 2, I went counterclockwise to relieve the stress on, I didn't want to have just like injure my knee, for example, or my right knee, if I keep doing counterclockwise turns, right? So you have to sort of adjust that and change the stress on your musculoskeletal system. So that's what I figured. Okay, well, you can do these rotations, make sure you're turning every mile or so. And so that's what I did. That took 2.5 days. It was a very tough effort, to be totally and completely honest. Having that live stream and having people watch it and track it and give me encouragement along the way was a huge reason why it was successful in the first place. If I was completely and totally on my own with no accountability and no one there to see that this thing is going on, I don't know that I would have had the same success. So that was the first one. While I was running the 100 in my living room, I ordered a treadmill online, and I got very lucky to do that when I did, because after, as you know, when the pandemic started, when we entered our second month of pandemic and being, stuck at home, stay at home, everyone ordered all the gym equipment. There was nothing to get. So if you didn't do that up front right away, you probably wouldn't get a treadmill for a very long time. So I ordered that, and my intention was, okay, well, this first one is going to be as painful as it sounds and ridiculous as it sounds in my living room. The subsequent ones are going to be on treadmill when I get it. So completed the living room run. The treadmill came right after I finished that run. I put the treadmill together, and the following weekend I ran it on treadmill. And I thought in my mind that running on a treadmill 100 miles is going to be an easy effort, right? All you're really doing is just keeping up with this moving belt. How difficult can it be? There's no variation in terrain, no variation in weather. You have all the certainty in the world. You have access to your fridge, the bathroom. This is going to be a piece of cake. That's what I thought. The treadmill run is one of the hardest mentally. It's mind-boggling. There's nothing to do. So I thought, oh my God, we need to exit this pandemic fast, because I don't know how many more weeks I can do of this thing. It was for 10 weeks. So New York City was locked down until after Memorial Day. So June 1st was when those lockdown restrictions started easing, right? And so we started this at the end of March, and it took until the beginning of June before I was outside of my apartment running outside again. And even then, so I wanted to make it around 10, right? So 10 weeks of running 100-mile races, right, in my apartment. That's what I wanted to do, to make 1,000 miles in my living room. And I just want to say this up front, because this is a question that everyone asks, is what did your downstairs neighbors think? They were out of town. So they weren't there. I tried to make the effort as quiet as possible. I tried to put dampeners underneath my carpets to make sure that you didn't hear me actually scurrying around. But they were out of town. Roughly 50% of my building, half the residents had temporarily located to somewhere outside of the city. And so that was that. That was 10 weeks of running. And so roughly 1,000 miles in my living room, all live streamed. And this is about 500 hours of video recording that I still have for that effort. When the restrictions were lifted, and I felt, we still had a pandemic going on. There were still no races going on. Everything was canceled. But I figured, okay, now we know more about how to handle and interact, in society. You wear the mask and hands, and maintain your distance. Like all these rules, we have these rules. I can venture outside and start to run races, start to run outside again. And those first few efforts, June and half of July, were all on my own efforts again. I had friends to come and support me for those weekends where I was running those 100-mile runs. And so they were in New Jersey, they were in Colorado, they were in Delaware. And so I figured, well, I still have this goal of running 50 states. I may as well, Delaware, for example, wasn't the race that was supposed to happen in Delaware, but my crew member and I, we constructed 100-mile course point to point from Rehoboth Beach. Was it Rehoboth Beach? Rehoboth Beach to Wilmington, Delaware. And so, that was a very long day, but it was very fun adventure, right? Then official races started to pick up again in mid-July. And so that happened around, now we're in our mid 80s. I think it was number 87 in the Game of Hundos, where we started having official races again. And that was just, I was so excited that oh my God, because now I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to plan it. I didn't have to plan logistics around it. I was like, oh my gosh, we're going back to official racing. This is great. You don't have to do your own efforts anymore. Fantastic. Let's go. But it's different. The race scene is not the same as it was pre-pandemic. And what I mean by that is when you have an ultra marathon and you have a 100-mile run, you have what's called aid stations that runners run to, right? And they run to these aid stations every roughly 5 to 8 miles. You might have another station where there's an opportunity to refill, get hydration, get your food, fuel up. If you have a drop bag there with some of like new sneakers or, new clothing, you can change out of that. That's the aid station. And you run to the aid station. And that, the expectation is once I get there, I get to, have a little bit of a break and refuel so I can continue on the next 5 or 8 mile stretch. Pre-pandemic, that was all fine and dandy. It was like a big party. Everyone, volunteers were there, runners were there who were taking a break. And it's kind of like everyone caught up and it's like a bit of a big social event for that area, right? During the pandemic, that wasn't the case. Everyone, maintained 6 feet. There were new rules around how to, get food at the aid station. You couldn't walk up to it and refill your own bottle or grab whatever nutrition. You couldn't do that. You had to hand your bottle over to a volunteer. It needed to be, you need to sanitize. Everyone needed to wear gloves. And understandably, this is how you make the race safe. So I understood, everyone understood. You had to wait in line, but everyone separated 6 feet apart. It wasn't the social, event that it used to be pre-pandemic, but also it took much longer to get what you needed. And for someone who's been running for, at that point, 87 weeks of running 100-mile races, I needed all the time that I could get. So getting to an aid station and having to wait an additional, 5 minutes to get everything you needed really added on to the amount of time in the race. So I figured, oh my goodness, I have to recalculate how long it's going to take to get to, from mile 26 to 34, because I spent 8 minutes at the aid station that I didn't plan on spending. So it's just reworking the problem. But after that point, it's never really smooth sailing. But once the official races were back on, it had gotten, and when we got to the home stretch, the final 10, that was it. There was no stopping. There was no stopping me. I had friends come out to on a number of those final races, and I had planned the final race to be in New York City, to be a 100-mile course in Manhattan. Half of it in Manhattan and half in Brooklyn and Queens, but the entire 100 miles in New York City. And I wanted to make it special. I wanted to dedicate that final race to my brother. So, you know, and to the project itself. So if you look at the race course, if you look at the map for the race course for that final 100, you'll notice that I used the Manhattan streets, the Manhattan grid, as sort of paper to write on. And I wrote, I ran on the streets to spell out Game of Hundos on the east side of Manhattan. And then we continued the run west. And on the west side of Manhattan, I wrote Run, Son, Run. And that was a special message that my brother had wrote to me when he gifted me a pair of sneakers back in 2010. So that was a message that had always stuck with me, that Run, Son, Run. And I figured, okay, what better way to dedicate this to my brother than to spell out that message in Manhattan? And that's what I did.
Unbelievable, man. I mean, in so many ways, for you to do this and to keep going. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, just hearing you talk about, you know, being in the car on your way from, you know, Salt Lake City to Mesa and literally turning around and having to go all the way back home to New York in the midst of this pandemic. You know, I would think that 99 out of 100 people would just, you know, say that's it. And I'm sure that, you know, you thought the same thing, and you did a great job of explaining it. But just the one thing of the many things that, you know, your story makes me think about is just mental toughness, you know, and being able to persevere and adapting in the face of this adversity that you encounter, to still pursue this, as you put it, and it's very appropriate, this very outsized goal. I mean, when you reflect back on the entire experience, you know, from how it started to the pandemic to finishing it the way that you did, you know, and you're right, very appropriately in your hometown of New York City. You know, what comes to mind for you? I mean, what did you learn about yourself? What are you most proud of? I'm sure these are questions you've gotten before, but what are the things that are still foremost in your mind, Michael?
Right. That's a very good question. I think so. When I finished it, the most common question that I received was, so what's next? And I thought, and I understand. I completely understand. You do this thing. Now the question is, oh my God, how can you possibly outdo this? Or what's the next, you know, goal that could possibly, you know, I didn't think that way, but I understand where people were coming from with that question. So I didn't have anything planned. And I told them, you know, my response to that was, well, exactly what's next is thinking about what had just happened the last 100 weeks and reflecting to see where I had been, right, and where that puts me now. And so, you know, from the start, I didn't do this as I didn't start it as like I wanted to set a record. I wanted to do this. I wanted to run 100. I didn't do that. Like, that wasn't my motivation for doing that in the first place. My motivation was, as a personal challenge, can I do 2? That was my very personal motivation. And then that started to change as I continued on, and, you know, with 3 and 4 and eventually 100. And while you're in it, while you're doing it, your focus is not on the journey, right? Maybe it is, but that's not your total focus. Is on, you know, logistics, execution. How do I be successful? How do I tie work with this? You know, like how do I make the how do I get from Tennessee back to New York to Hawaii, right? Like how do I execute that leg? That's your focus. And so I didn't have time to think about the journey. The only thing I really had time for was, how do I execute the journey? and so when I crossed that finish line, and the finish line was in front of my house. It was actually that's the way it was planned. It was really cool. You know, once I crossed that finish line, don't jump into something arbitrarily because you feel pressure to continue doing something like this. Like, that wasn't my goal at all. I wanted to take the time to figure out where I was. Why did I do it? Right? Like, what was the real purpose of doing this thing? And, you know, I didn't have a really strong, or I didn't know the answer, I should say. I didn't really understand and know the answer after crossing the finish line. I needed to take time to think about it, you know, and that was the main reason why I took time off this year. I didn't want to just jump into something and and start running hundreds again or start a new challenge. No, I wanted to understand, okay, what was this for really? You know, like high level on the surface, I know, you know, I have these reasons for doing what I did. I, you know, dedicate this to my brother. I go out, you know, he had instilled his life message is now imprinted on me, right? To go and live your life while you can. So that's big motivation for doing those things. But I wanted to understand deeper than that, where is this coming from? You know, like what is this? So I've taken the last couple of months to, or the first few months of this year, I should say, to really think about that, to write about it, to write about the experience. And that's what, to me, what it means is it is a very big personal challenge for myself. You know, I have very personal reasons that we discussed for doing this thing. And that's going to be the same for everyone who steps into the ultra marathon or just any arena, but running, for example. It was very personal for me, right? And the questions that I received today come from people who preface their question with, okay, you know, this pales in comparison to what you did, but like, I just want some advice on how to run my first marathon. And then, you know, I preface my answer with, no. It doesn't matter if it pales in comparison. Don't compare your effort with mine. Yours is a very personal one. So running running a marathon distance, 26.2, is a very big deal. So, you know, I tried to explain, okay, well, first of all, 100 miles is 100 miles. 26 miles is 26 miles. That's still very much a big deal. Let's talk about it. And so I just had this conversation with someone this past weekend who wanted advice on how to run their first long distance race, which was a marathon coming up in November. But she was very like, she didn't know if she should ask me because it didn't compare at all to what I had done. And I said, no, well, this is all, it's all numbers in the end, right? So the distances don't matter. It's the reasons why we're doing it, right? I can tell you personally, I ran my first marathon for my brother. At the time, that was a very big effort for me that I didn't think I can do. And, you know, you have a very personal reason for doing your first marathon. And at this time, it might be something you feel that you can't do until, of course, you actually do it. So the journey is different for everyone, right? And the numbers are arbitrary, right? Like, you know, at the end of it, the Game of Hundos was 10,000 miles. It's a very personal journey that I'm still working through and trying to piece together the overall narrative, the overall arc, what was it for kind of thing. But it was just that, you know, a personal journey, and it wasn't impossible. Right. And so like I had done this, started out to see if I could do 2 of these, and then it morphed into what it eventually morphed into. But at the end of it, I found out that this is not an impossible thing. If people want to do something similar to this, something different, they can totally do that. I'm not a professional runner. I'm not an elite athlete. I'm a regular person. And if I can do this thing or something like this, so can everyone else, or so can anyone else. They can set a goal that they think they can't possibly do, work on it, and work towards completion. And I truly believe that.
Yeah, you kind of answered my question, which was, you know, what lesson do you hope that people would take away from hearing your story? So instead, because I feel like you just answered it, and feel free to add on to that if you want to, but instead, my last question for you is this: you know, what do you think your brother would say about this project, about this accomplishment, Michael?
I love that question because I know exactly what he would say. At the end of it, you know, crossing that finish line, he would say, I told you would love it. Because that was part of the disagreement, right, in philosophy that we had growing up was, you know, I told him, bro, you have to travel less and save your money. Why are you going? Where are you going now? Right. And then he would tell me, you need to stop working so much and go and like do these things, or like do one of these things, or just once travel outside the country. You would love it. And he's totally right. He is completely 100% right. And so, you know, there's I regret not doing this kind of thing earlier in life, but I'm grateful that I had that eye-opening experience, you know, that I had. And so, his message to me that he'd been telling me all of my 20s is something that I live by now, right? To go and live while you can. And he would tell me, I knew you would like it.
Man, oh man. Unbelievable story. Appreciate you sharing it all with us. It's been a privilege for me to get to hear about it and talk with you and just find out how you did this, but also just like what it took. And what you learned about yourself. And I think your message is it's a great one, and it's like, and you mentioned it earlier. It's like, you're an ordinary guy. I mean, you are not like this superhero, although I'm sure so many people do look at you now as such, and justifiably so. I mean, you deserve all of the trappings that come with your status as the guy who did this. But I think it's a great message, that if you set a goal, and you're persistent and you're mentally tough and you can, adapt as you did. I mean, it didn't, like you said, it didn't happen as scripted, but you did it. Then you can accomplish anything. And I think that's just a wonderful message to share. And we appreciate you sharing that with us, Michael.
I appreciate you having me on here to tell that message. Thank you, Justin.